who is DeNA? What does the future of TCG Pocket actually look like? How much are we expecting game mechanics to change in the future? Why are there so many different tickets and tokens and shop items and shop fronts? And will the game over time be focused on milking whales as opposed to making the game relatively friendly to play for all players? These are some of the questions I'm going to try and answer in this video by taking a deep dive into the developers that is DeNA and its previous endeavors like previous games. But most of all, I want to compare the one game that is probably the closest to Pokemon TCG Pocket that DeNA has made in the past, and that is Pokemon Masters EX. Welcome back to another TCG Pocket video, it's Bro Vinny here. I don't know about you, but when I first looked into DeNA, I was expecting their website to go straight into TCG Pocket or any of the other games, but I was so very wrong. DeNA is so much more than just games. The Japanese players probably knew this, but I didn't. Turns out DeNA is into sports as well. They bought the Yokohama Bay Stars baseball team back in 2011. After the purchase, the name of this team got changed from Yokohama Bay Stars to Yokohama DeNA Bay Stars. And apparently at some point in the past, it was actually called the Yokohama Taiyo Whales. I guess this is not the first time that DeNA is riding on whales. And a shout out to the DeNA team because they actually won the Japan series in 2024, which it hadn't done for 26 years prior to that. So I guess the release of TCG Pocket wasn't the only thing they were winning in 2024. That aside, DeNA's also dealt in healthcare, live streaming, social media, which was one of the earlier apps that they were working on, and of course their involvement in gaming, particularly the collaboration with Nintendo stuff from 2015. Now, while DeNA has been involved in numerous of these games that are displayed here, they weren't the main developers as far as I'm concerned on most of these. Now, how much involvement DeNA had in any of these games, I can't actually tell. I tried to look into it, but I'm not sure if Nintendo did most of the work or if DeNA did most of the work. However, the SEO did say that they created Super Mario Run, but if you try to look for information on other games, it doesn't actually say exactly how much DeNA was involved. So we're not really going to use any of these games to answer our questions today. But one thing I would like to mention is that Yusuke, the senior executive officer, said that we created Super Mario Run as a mobile action game featuring Mario that is both safe and entertaining. The keyword here that I want to focus on is safe. I'm wondering whether this word means that DeNA will never let us actually have a trading hub where we communicate with each other from within the game. I'm no stranger to Nintendo games, and I can tell you that most of their most popular titles don't actually have any in-game chat, even if they have a multiplayer online mode. And if they did, the options for chat are very limited, which we're going to cover in a moment as well. So if you're wondering why the multiplayer aspect of DeNA games like TCG Pocket or Pokemon Masters have such atrocious mechanics, maybe part of the problem is that they have to make things safe to make sure that any chat that does happen doesn't allow for any toxicity. I guess to protect children or whatnot. Now the focus for today's video isn't going to be any of these games because, well, I couldn't tell how much involvement DeNA had, and they're not really Pokemon. Today we're going to compare only two games that DeNA has led that are both Pokemon games. In other words, they worked in collaboration with TPC, the Pokemon company. And I'm in a rather niche situation whereby I'm both a content creator that's been around since the start of the first Pokemon game, Pokemon Masters, all the way until Pokemon TCG Pocket. And to this day, I still play both. And just to prove that I actually still play Pokemon Masters, I started a gym, which is a really new feature in the game. And the game is about to make it to 5.5 years since release. And I've been seeing people say that it will end service since maybe 3 or 2 years in, maybe even first year. I've seen people say that this game wouldn't last, and for some reason it's still around. And yes, the game has as many ups and downs, but certainly it's an old game now and is only seeing a decline of players, well, on my server anyway. So can looking at Masters, which is one of DeNA's first Pokemon games, tell us anything about the future of TCG Pocket? Now, I must say, anything I say in this video assumes that they will treat both games the same way just for simplicity. Of course, they may change their strategies on how they're going to treat TCG Pocket, and only time will tell. But since this is the closest relative we have to TCG Pocket, we may be able to get some insight looking at Masters, which is a much less popular game, so not a lot of people would know DeNA that well, to see, for example, how they will monetize the game, how they will change game mechanics, how they're going to change the menu, how are they going to treat trading, how much will they allow power creep, so that you have to keep getting new cards. What about discount bundles? Are we expecting to see a lot of discount bundles in the future, or were all the discount bundles in the past just a one-off? Now, I'll be the first to admit that Pokemon Masters was a really bad game to start with. They had pretty much one story mode and then some really bad cooperative features, and then once you were done with the solo mode, which could be done in like one day on release of the game, there wasn't much to do except just to pull on new units, what the game calls sync pairs. So sync pair scouting is the main gacha mechanic in this game. And the goal is to collect trainers more than it is to collect Pokemon. Yes, you can also collect Pokemon, but you don't complete a Pokedex, so to speak. You would complete a sync pair dex, or rather a trainer dex. So needless to say, because of how little this game had to offer players at the start, it had a huge drop in player count. Now, I don't have any numbers to prove that, I just know that from experience. But what I do have to show is this statement about TCG Pocket from their CEO. TCG Pocket has a very high retention rate compared to other DeNA games, and a wide variety of users are engaging with the game on a daily basis, including a large number of subscribed to the Premium Pass. So whatever strategies they used for TCG Pocket worked better than it did at the start of Pokemon Masters. Is it the versus mode, the meta competitive gameplay that has kept the players? Or are they just riding the hype of collecting cards? Because collecting trainers, well, that wasn't so much a thing before Pokemon Masters started. So that's one key difference between Masters and TCG Pocket, is that TCG Pocket is just retaining their players better. But even then, I've heard players after a few weeks from release say that this game is a bit dry, a bit mundane. And after the first few weeks of release, there were people saying that everything got a bit repetitive, everyone's just using the same 2 to 3 decks. But then with the release of Mythical Island, and very soon after that, Spacetime Smackdown, well, the game has changed quite a bit already. This amount of change wasn't seen in Masters until I think maybe a year or two later. Masters did actually improve the gameplay mechanic a lot, but it took a long time to get there. And by then they had already lost most of their player base. Again, I don't have any numbers to back myself on that. That is just from personal experience. So perhaps DeNA has learned from Masters and actually implemented the features that kept players coming back or brought new players in by, for example, having more frequent events or releasing new things often. If you're free to play, you've probably felt the pressure of them releasing Mythical Islands, Spacetime Smackdown, and then soon to be the next set as well. You felt the pressure of not being able to complete your sets before we moved on. And it's true that in Masters, this happened more in recent years. They kept adding more and more banners for you to do these sync scouts. There used to be maybe just 1 or maybe 2 really hyped up, really good units that you would pull, you would scout for at a time. But these days, almost everything is useful, and they release several new gacha banners at a time. It's great for gameplay if it didn't cost you money. So I guess for TCG Pocket, they're gonna start strong with that. With expansion packs being equivalent to the sync scouts in Masters, they're going to release a lot of them frequently so that you're almost always out of Hourglass. Of course, that is both a good thing and a bad thing. Bad thing is, well, it's going to cost you more if your aim is to collect everything. The good thing is, well, there's more things to do. There's more things to collect. I mean, it makes a game good if there's a challenge, right? Unfortunately, the challenge is on your wallet. So from my experience with Masters, my tip for you with regards to DeNA games, for the average user who are not giga whales, don't try to complete your decks. I spent thousands on Masters every year, and I'm still nowhere near completing the decks. I expect the same for TCG Pocket, and so far it's looking worse. Instead, just focus on your favorite cards or the meta cards that you need. Don't try to get everything. It is common knowledge in Masters that you should be saving your gems for a good scout in the future. Wait for your favorite sync pair to show up and then spend all your hourglass on it instead of trying to pull on everything. So with a stronger player base and better retention in TCG Pocket, I expect the life of that game to run for even longer than Masters, which has, well, lasted 5.5 years. So if you're one of those people who has ever heard of EOS or end of service, that's not really something you need to be concerned about for TCG Pocket, because we have a precedence where, well, they haven't even ended this game. And if this is your first live service game, let me fill you in on what EOS means. It means the game server shuts down because it costs money to run a server. It takes energy, it takes electricity, it requires developers to constantly maintain, update to make sure things don't crash, etc. But when a game ends its service, you can't even log into the game anymore, even just to appreciate all your card pools from before. So while I said that you don't really need to worry about that yet, you've actually agreed at the start of the game that should they end service on you, you will simply accept your fate. This is the terms of use in Pokemon TCG Pocket. We may notify users through the service or the official website at least 30 days in advance if the service is to be terminated. And I guess the reason why they say that is to give you a fair time, a fair warning to spend your paid gold or your paid gems, etc. Basically so that, well, you can't get a refund because, well, you agreed to this, you agreed to the terms of use, and they gave you fair warning before ending the game. Again, not something you really need to worry about at this stage, but live service games, gacha games, they do end service, and if you've never seen one before, you should talk to somebody who's seen a game that's ended service to understand how that feels. And I guess the reason why I bring this up is, well, unlike physical TCG cards, it's not like when the game ends service, then 20 years later you decide that you want to go back and relive those memories for the nostalgia, that you can just go back to your mom's basement and dig up your old cards. The game ending service means that it's just gonna be gone. But there are exceptions to this. Not every company or every developer ends a service in the same way. Some of them, although very rare, do allow access to your game after the end of service. They simply won't add any more updates or allow you to trade and so on. One kind of example of this is actually Animal Crossing Pocket Camp. That is a mobile game that originally was monetized by in-game purchases, in-app purchases, but at the end of service, they had converted this game to what's now called Animal Crossing Pocket Camp Complete, where you just do a one-off payment and you get the complete game. So no more microtransactions, but you still have to pay a once-off fee. Now, I didn't personally play this game, but I did speak to somebody who has to understand how the conversion went. And by and large, I don't think the community was upset with how they handled this end of service. Again, I didn't personally play it, so I don't have much of an opinion on it. If you played this game and you saw the change from before the end of service to after the end of service, let us know in the comments section below. How did you think the transition went? Again, I don't think Animal Crossing was actually headed by DeNA. It's not clear how much involvement DeNA had on that game, but DeNA was involved. Next, let's talk about trading. This one's a bit of a hot topic. I've seen a lot of people complain about this feature, and the complaints range quite a bit. They range from the fact that it costs a lot in order to trade, to not being able to trade 2 stars or 3 stars or crown rares, to just overall being a bit of a tedious process when they could have just implemented a trading hub like a marketplace within the game itself instead of having to find your own trade partners in other chat groups or other communities. So in answer to these concerns, well, first of all, we already talked about the safety features that DeNA likes to implement. So allowing there to be a trading hub from within the game where you can communicate with other players was probably never going to happen. In fact, there's essentially no ability to chat within Pokemon Masters 5.5 years after release. In the most recent installation called Trainer Gym, they did implement a message board if you have a look at this. But this message board is extremely limited. You can't actually type anything. The only thing you can do is send these emotes. But I can't actually have any customized message. They do give you a few options to choose from, but by and large, I think it's to prevent player toxicity. So proper communication within the game itself for trading purposes, for example, is probably not going to be implemented because, well, even to this day, Masters never got a proper message board. But what about trading 2 stars and 3 stars and crown rares, all the actual stuff that we really want in order to complete our collections? I think that eventually they will be allowed to be traded, because if you look at detailed trade lists, it almost looks like they plan for you to be able to trade these in the future, because they're currently not lit, but maybe in the future, these 3 rarities can be traded. But how far into the future? My hunch is that it's probably going to be 6 to 12 months, because that's about when I would feel like Genetic Apex or the older sets, well, they're not really necessary anymore. They've been completely power creeped, and maybe then they'll allow us to trade for the cards because they're not as used, they're not as desirable or as hyped, so they're not really making them that much money at that point. In Pokemon Masters, they did make older features more accessible over time, because then they implement new features and then make those their monetization focus. So eventually I do think that older things will become more available. Even in Masters, they do rerun banners that have slightly better rates, or maybe there'll be a banner which guarantees a certain old unit that you can get. So in time, I do think that these things will become more easy to obtain, or at least more tradable. Is there any feature in Masters that we can make a comparison? Like how did Master treat trading? Well, there's actually no trading in Pokemon Masters because it's more of a solo game. They did at the start introduce a co-op mode, but that's hardly used, and the cooperative mode is quite bad. In actual fact, because of how they treated co-op mode in Masters, I wasn't expecting very much from TCG Pocket with regards to trading. It seemed like every co-op mode or every co-op event they tried to introduce was a flop. You would go in, do the mode, farm your materials that you need from the event, and then just quit, just bail. You go play something else. And for the most part, the co-op mode was to randomly link with people. You can choose to link with friends, but the ability to link with friends was quite tedious. It wasn't easy to get friends together to play this game. I've probably tried it twice and then just didn't bother with it at all. In fact, the early adopters of Masters probably remember these features called power chain, unity attacks. Like, how often do we see them today? Probably never. Many players simply just forgot that they even exist, or didn't know that they existed to begin with if you just started this game. In fact, it wasn't until after TCG Pocket got released did they actually introduce the Trainer Gym feature, which is a little bit more fun as a cooperative mode than every other co-op mode they've released so far. Although when I say fun, I just mean that it's great to collect rewards with your friends, working together towards a goal. There's actually nothing to do within this Trainer Gym besides sending the occasional emoji. In fact, I'd like to at this point address another problem about DeNA games. They seem to make you feel like flipping between menus is part of the game. Again, there's not much gameplay in this gym trainer thing. You can see the activity, you can see gym members, you can go to your missions, you can collect stuff from the missions, but otherwise you would exit out of the gym and then you do something else. I find that about 90% of my time spent playing this game is just flipping between menus, trying to collect rewards or missions or items or etc. Even though I do actually enjoy the game mechanic itself, which is the 3v3 PvE competitive modes, but when I think about it, I actually spend a lot of time in Masters just flipping between menus. And somehow they make it feel rewarding when I do, because I get to collect items everywhere I go. Now, this may or may not sound familiar to you, but if you look at the number of mission tabs and the number of shop fronts that this game has in TCG Pocket, you may have found that it was a bit overwhelming at first. Why are there like so many different ticket systems, and then there's emblems and special tickets, and then there's the limited time ones, and then there's the premium pass ones, and then you go to purchase gold and look at all of those tabs, and then you go to the missions tab, there's dex missions, deck missions, theme collections. Look, that's all great. Everybody likes to feel rewarded, but if you think about it, you actually spend a lot of time just flipping through menus. And this game hasn't even been released that long. The menus I'm talking about in Masters have built up over 5 years. They kept adding more stuff. We already talked about the gym trainer feature. Again, there's not much gameplay in there. You just go in there to collect your rewards. Trainer Lodge here takes the most time of everything, and then depending on how many events are running at the same time, there's like 5 or 6 or maybe no, even more of these mission tabs, and that's just in the event missions. There's the daily missions, and then there's the general missions, there's the bingo missions, which is another kind of dead feature. I don't know, I'm not a game psychologist, but maybe clicking buttons is part of the endorphin releasing reward system that we all enjoy. And speaking of dead features, remember those hourglasses we exchanged at the start of the game that had slightly better shop ticket rates compared to the monthly ones? Why are they still there? Initially, we thought maybe every time they release a new set, they would refresh these hourglasses. But so far, it seems like it's a one-off purchase with these original hourglasses. So if I had purchased them all already, why do they still display this? Why do they love clogging up my user interface? Well, if you want to ask about old useless resources or items in Pokemon Masters as a comparison, you're gonna be surprised. Let me show you something. This is what my bag looks like after 5.5 years of play. I have a lot of items that I have over 100,000 pieces of. I don't have any use for them. I don't have any use for these items. The game doesn't have any use for them. It's just there. These things clog up my, like, some of these aren't even used anymore. Training machines, they're really old. They're like from way back at the start of the game. It's great to have a legacy collection, but you can see that perhaps DeNA isn't going to do away with the hourglasses that we exchanged one time because, well, they like to clog up your screen, maybe to feed on that hoarding personality in each of us. By the way, this is only one of the many menus that I'm showing you. It's crazy the number of items are actually in this game. Sometimes I even forget where things are. But one more thing, the amount of resources and different materials actually tells you about DeNA games is that not only do they power creep units, like when I say units I mean like cards like Dialga EX or Palkia EX or sync pairs in Masters, I also mean they power creep resources. Old resources become less and less relevant. So for example, if you have shop tickets, if you hold on to the shop tickets for several years, in several years time, they're not going to be that useful. There's going to be new resources that you earn in the game in order to buy newer things, to exchange for newer things that are more relevant to the times. And if you are wondering why in premium missions you only got 200 trade tokens, but somehow over time you were able to accumulate more and more trade tokens, well, it's because DeNA likes to give you your resources like trade tokens that we were just complaining about from many different means, many different ways. Maybe it adds to the confusion, or maybe it just helps you feel rewarded for what you're doing. So in the Wonder Pick events, now we're getting to see some trade tokens. In the Premium Pass, trade tokens were added. So the initial complaints about having to trade in your rarer cards in order to obtain trade tokens, well, now it's much less of a complaint because we're getting these trade tokens via other means. So now trading doesn't seem as costly as it did at the release. And actually, this is typical of DeNA. So when people were complaining about how costly it was to trade, I wasn't overly concerned at the time when the mechanic was released, because I saw how DeNA did things in Pokemon Masters. Let me give you an example. Currently, one of the most meta items in the game in Pokemon Masters are these things called roll cakes. Roll cakes were extremely expensive at release of this mechanic. They were pretty much only tailored to whales, but after some time, they did give free-to-play players more options to obtain them. So they released a thing called roll cake coins. What it is if you collect 20 of these, you're allowed to get one roll cake. In this mode, you can get one roll cake coin per day. Now that doesn't sound so bad. 20 days you can get a meta item, but that's not how DeNA worked. Every day you can get one of these coins, but there's 5 types of these coins. So it actually takes you 100 days in order to get 5 of these cakes. In 20 days, you'd only have 4 coins of each of the 5 cakes. Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, don't worry. I'm just saying DeNA likes to give you a little bit at a time, but never quite give you enough to do what you need to do if you're free to play. To make matters worse, or I don't know if it's better or worse, but they also added another way that a free to play player could get more of these roll cakes. You can actually exchange these daily tickets. You can get one of these daily tickets every day. If you have 5 of them, you can exchange for 1 roll cake coin. So you wonder why they don't just give you a coin in 5 days as opposed to give you a ticket that could exchange for a coin if you have 5 tickets. It seems like DeNA loves giving you lots of different ways to get the same thing. Again, maybe it's just to make you feel rewarded for what you're doing, so that as you're flipping through the pages and exchanging items, you feel like you're actually doing something, even if what you're doing is minuscule. Regardless, my point being that over time, there were more and more ways that you could get those meta items. It's just that by the time you actually have enough resources, let's say as a free to play, to get those items, the game's moved on to another feature or the meta has changed. And so DeNA's really good at making it confusing about where you can farm certain items to do what you need to do, like where can you get trade tokens. The list of places you can get trade tokens seems to be expanding over time. And will trade tokens even be relevant in a few years' time? At some point, there's probably going to be a super trade token that allows you to trade 2 stars and 3 stars. I don't know, just an idea, but it does sound like what DeNA would do. The more different ways you can do things, the better, because it makes flipping through menus feel like a game in itself. And let's talk a little bit more about wasting your time. And when I say wasting your time, I mean they do it fairly well. They make you feel like you're being rewarded when you're actually just flipping through pages and clicking buttons, as opposed to playing a game. At this point, I'd like to apologize that this video sounds a bit convoluted. It's because every point kind of diverges into several points I want to make, so there may be some repetitions. Now, let's talk about shop tickets again. There's several ways you can get shop tickets, but let's just focus on the daily ones. So you get 5 shop tickets every day if somebody either likes your stuff or likes you after the battle. And then you can get one in the shop as well if you simply click this button. By the way, they also do something like this in Pokemon Masters, where they make you click on the shop in order to earn a free reward, but actually making you browse the shop at the same time. Nothing wrong with that if you've got good self-control, but if you end up going into all of the shop items while you're there, then you might end up spending some money. But let's talk about how little these shop tickets actually mean. Now, I do enjoy the shop tickets myself too, and I do try to earn as much as I can every day, but how much is one shop ticket actually worth to you? Ignoring the tickets you can get from battle tasks and other ways, we're just talking about the 5 daily tickets and the one that you get from the free gift. Every day you can earn 6 shop tickets, and 6 shop tickets is worth 2 hourglass. You need 12 hourglass in order to get 1 free pack. So in other words, it takes you 6 days to farm these daily tickets in order to earn 1 free pack. And most of the time, you're not going to get very much from 1 free pack. Of course, it's better than nothing, but if you miss out on a few tickets, is it really worth your time stressing over? The main point being that DeNA is just really good at making you feel rewarded for clicking buttons and flipping through menus like this. Next, let's talk about reruns. What I mean by that is, some of you have been a little bit concerned that perhaps older sets, let's say Genetic Apex, might get phased out over time for various reasons. Well, first of all, as new sets come in, better, stronger cards will get released, and they will power creep the really old sets. And similar to physical TCG game, older sets do actually get phased out. You can't actually use like Gen 1 base set Charizard in current competitive play. Not that it will be of any use because it's going to be too weak, but also it's just not currently allowed in legal competitive play. So older sets like Genetic Apex, well, maybe they will get phased out. So the concern is, will you be able to pull on them anymore, and what happens to your pack points? If you really like a certain card, let's say you really like this Erica here and you haven't got her yet, should you try and get her now, or should you wait for some time, maybe when it comes back in the future? Will it come back in the future? Since TCG Pocket is relatively new, we haven't had a chance to see what happens yet. But if we were to draw some correlations from Pokemon Masters, well, I'd say that most sync pairs, the limited ones, do have reruns in Pokemon Master. And I see this guy maybe once a year or maybe a little less than that, but it does happen. They do get reruns. So my hunch is, even if Genetic Apex were to leave us for good, there is a fair chance it will come back as a rerun because, well, it doesn't actually cost them very much to re-deliver these packs to us because all the artworks and everything is already done, already paid for, or all the artists have already done their work. So it doesn't really cost them much in order to have these run again, even if it's for completion's sake. In fact, a lot of the times when DeNA did reruns in Pokemon Masters, they offered better rates for pulling the same stuff. Understandably, at that point in time, so let's say a year or two later, pulling on Genetic Apex, well, the cards aren't that powerful anymore because they're not really as meta relevant at that point. So DeNA would entice us with some presents or better rates in order to pull on these cards. So if you're after a specific card for completion or cosmetic purposes only, it could be worth you holding on until these sets get a rerun. Of course, I'm not saying this with certainty. Maybe they will never rerun these sets, or maybe they will never leave it to begin with. How they treat TCG Pocket in terms of sets being rerun, that we'll just have to wait and see. A side note, some sync pairs actually never got a rerun in Pokemon Masters. Heck, I could even say the same for Pokemon Go. There were some specific species that were not rerun at all. I'm not sure what it is, maybe it's to do with licensing, but it seems like certain collaborations, like for example, this was an anime collaboration with Pokemon Masters where you can get Ash Ketchum in the game. Well, that one never got a rerun. It was available for about a month's time back in August 2022, and that was it. We never saw him again. So sometimes there are things that don't come up again, so just be aware of that. And another concern I have is I'm not sure how they're going to deal with pack points. I still haven't spent a single one of my pack points, and if this set were to ever leave us, what will happen to the remaining pack points? Hopefully they'll warn us and tell us to actually use them up before the set leaves, and then maybe the pack points will disappear. The equivalent of this in Pokemon Masters is this thing here in the top right. That's called Scout Points. Scout Points are earned similar to pack points. You pull on this banner and over time you build up these Scout Points. Once you reach the maximum Scout Point, you get a guarantee on whatever unit you want from within this banner. Now the thing about Masters Scout Points is that it doesn't stay after this banner leaves. So these banners don't last very long, they last several weeks, unlike TCG Pocket. TCG Pocket doesn't have any end date set yet for any of its sets. But if we were to make a comparison, well, when a banner leaves, like let's say this banner leaves on the 20th of February, any Scout Points that you've earned before that, unless you've reached the maximum and collected your reward, well, it gets cleared and then you have to start again if this banner were to come back again. So watch this space and see what happens or what the developers will say about pack points should an expansion leave us in the future. Next, I want to focus on the game mechanics, the actual gameplay of each of the games. So of course in TCG Pocket, it's about the card battles. In Masters, it's these 3v3 PvE battles. And I think DeNA really does shine in terms of making games, like making gameplay. All the menu flipping aside, this is what's actually kept me playing both games for some time. When TCG Pocket first released, the game seemed fairly simple, and it's good because of how basic and simple it was. It attracted a wide range of players, but you've probably noticed by now, the game is starting to get a bit more complex with the addition of tool cards and probably eventually stadium cards, and then all sorts of new supporters getting added. But this complexity actually isn't even at the level of Pokemon Masters complexity. Let me go through some things with you and tell you what I think will happen with TCG Pocket. If you thought that TCG Pocket had a lot of reading involved in order to understand how cards work, it's probably going to get worse over time. This is one of the more recent units you can get from Pokemon Masters, and look at how much you have to read in order to understand how a unit works. So this is one of the passive skills of Giovanni, and then you gotta read all of this text to understand how this unit works, and that's just its passive skills. You still have to read its attacks, the trainer moves, and read all of this text in order to understand what Guzzlord does. And that's still not everything. There's these things called lucky skills, theme skills, and that's not even it. There's also this thing called a sync grid, and you can build your character in a certain way to serve a specific need, and pretty much every character is unique in what they do. It wasn't always like this. At the start of the game, Masters had actually followed the core series somewhat loosely. If you look, each unit still has the usual core series stats. They've got the HP, attack, defense, special attack, special defense, and speed. And all of these can be buffed or debuffed. But at some point, Masters started introducing their own mechanics. If you haven't heard of a thing called a rebuff, I don't blame you, because I haven't until it was introduced in Masters. So there's buff, debuff, and then there's rebuff. And maybe you've heard of Rain Dance before, you know, the thing that makes rain and then water moves are powered up in the core series game. Well, Masters has that, but then they introduced their own thing called zones. Because there's ways to power up water moves and fire moves, but there's no way to power up things like dragon moves or steel moves, so they introduced their own mechanic called Steel Zone, Dragon Zone, etc. I won't go through everything, but there's a lot more that Masters just went on a tangent from the core series game. There are things called theme circles, physical move up next, special moves up next, super effective move up next, and the list just goes on. What I'm saying is, don't let this familiarity with trainer cards, supporter cards, tool cards, stadium cards fool you, because DeNA will do whatever they want when the time is right. When they run out of ideas using old mechanics like these, they will introduce new types of cards to keep the game alive, as they did for Pokemon Masters. Again, it's just my speculation, but it seems like something DeNA would do. Another very DeNA thing to do is the auto feature. That also exists in Pokemon Masters. And for the most part, I think most people appreciate having that auto feature, so that sometimes you just don't want to think, you just want to leave the game running, and hopefully the auto feature will help you achieve some of your rewards and so on. To me, the auto feature is actually more reminiscent of something of a chore, because in Pokemon Masters, I use the auto feature on really boring stages. So there's these daily stages that we have to do to get certain rewards. We talked about the roll cake coins before, and they're super easy. It's just that you have to actually do them to get the reward. So that's what we use the auto feature for there. But at some point throughout the life of Pokemon Masters, even the auto feature got a fast forward option. And I don't remember if it was because of players complaining about how repetitive things got, but there's this feature called a skip ticket. Now, I've got 10,000 of them, so again, you can see that I just have a lot of junk in this game. What the skip ticket allows you to do is basically immediately complete a stage which you've completed before. Because, well, why do the same thing all over again? But you can't use the skip ticket for everything. So far, I'm not seeing any need for skip tickets in TCG Pocket, because actually the solo battle tasks are kind of fun. Actually, you're challenged to build decks in a certain way in order to complete these tasks. So I'm glad that they didn't introduce those extremely repetitive stages into TCG Pocket. yet hence there's no need for skip tickets. But the fact that auto feature is here tells me, well, maybe there's a potential for skip tickets in the future if these stages become repetitive. And the second last thing I want to talk about in this video, and I know it's getting long, but there's just a lot to talk about, is the loading time. Now, so far it doesn't look so bad. If you scroll down on your card list, it seems like things are loading fairly quickly. Now, I'm using my PC right now, but it doesn't look too bad on mobile either. But so far, we've only had 3 sets being released, and even at the start of Masters, it wasn't too bad. Loading time was reasonable. Let me show you what it looks like today. It's one of the things why I'm embarrassed to introduce this game to anybody. It's because look at the loading time. Okay, so I'm going to press upgrade, and what it does is it shows me all the units that I have available that I can choose to upgrade or use. So basically everything I've earned over time. So I'm going to click the button now and see how long it takes to load my units, my sync pairs. Okay, I've actually got filter on right now because that's how I prevent extreme loading times. What I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the filter for only water units. I'm going to clear and show all of my units. So I've already clicked, by the way. And yeah, so this is how long it takes to load my units. And I have to access this fairly frequently in order to build teams and reorganize my units for stages and so on. That's how long it takes every time I click into this page. So as the game got bigger and bigger and I pulled more and more units, the loading time got worse and worse, and I've actually personally experienced that the game being unplayable on older devices. I had to upgrade my device to keep playing. I've heard of people who can't even open the game because of how much, well, stuff there is in this game. And this doesn't matter whether you're on iOS or Android. I've had it happen on both devices where it just either crashes or doesn't load or load very slowly. The equivalent of this in TCG will be your card list. I mean, there's already a bit of a loading time for your entire card list, although it's not too bad right now. As more packs get released and then this list gets longer and longer, it's already becoming a bit hard to find the things you need. But on top of that, I am concerned that this loading time will actually get worse. Hopefully it's actually one of those things they've learned not to mess up because of their previous game, and maybe they'll find a way to reorganize cards or buy expansions so that it's still easy to navigate but not take too much loading time. Just for your reference, for comparison purposes, currently Masters takes up 6 GB of your storage, whereas TCG Pocket takes up 1.5 GB of your storage. So by the time it catches up to how much data you need to store on your device, 4 times more data, maybe at that point the game will lag a bit more. And last but not least, reduced price PokeGold, or rather discount bundles. Based on Masters history, I think they're actually doing a lot better in terms of introducing discount or value bundles in TCG Pocket. In Masters, initially, it was just the basic expensive diamond shop, and there weren't many discount bundles. Today, I see discount bundles frequently in Pokemon Masters, and there's even something that's quite similar to a subscription, but not quite. So Masters actually never introduced a subscription service. They have something that you can buy every 20 days that is a fairly good value item, whereas TCG Pocket actually goes through the app stores to give you a premium pass that is a subscription service. But based on how frequently I am seeing discount bundles in Masters, I don't think you guys need to worry. So if you're not a Giga Whale, it can be worth you holding off buying gold until the reduced price PokeGold comes back. Although typically towards the start of the game, reduced price or value bundles are not as frequent as, well, mid or towards the end of a game life cycle. But just a reminder, as I said, it's always good to save your resources. Just get what you need and hold on to your hourglass or your gold until the next set, because power creep exists in DeNA games. In fact, among analytical Masters players, it is known that in the latter years, Masters provided less and less free gems for the free-to-play players, forcing a lot of the free-to-play to leave the game, and the whales had to spend more and more in order to keep up. So even though they introduced more and more value bundles and also introduced a subscription-like bundle, you weren't necessarily saving money because they're giving you less free items, free resources from within the game. So all in all, I do see similarities because it is made by the same developer between TCG Pocket and Pokemon Masters. The good news is I think they've actually made a lot of improvements with TCG Pocket. They learned from some of the mistakes and didn't reintroduce the same things. But where they were successful in how they sold their sync units or made you feel like you were rewarded flipping between pages, collecting little bits of resources here and there, they did continue on with that with their new game. Let me know if you have any questions about this topic in the comment section below. And if you found this topic interesting, please leave a like and subscribe, and maybe I'll consider making more of this type of content in the future.